Hi guys. Welcome. Welcome to another episode on my philosophy of timing. Um yeah, kind of just woke up this morning, as you could tell, and I was like, yeah, I really want to talk about this. Really want to talk about expanding on my philosophy of timing. And one thing that is always sort of paradoxical about my philosophy of timing is the notion of is there such thing as a right time? Um, which is an interesting thing to consider because from our point of view, we always talk about, how we look at time and situations as if there is a right time to do things. There's sort of but what's interesting about the idea or the conception of having a right time is that it seems when we speak of the term that there is a wrong time, there is a right time, what we're actually talking about when we're saying things like, oh, it's the wrong time, I think, or I think it's the right time to do this, what we actually mean when we say those terms is conditions, that there are specific moments that don't satisfy conditions to which we should enact upon, or when we should enact upon those moments. So I do think this is actually what we're referring to when we're talking about, oh, it's the wrong time, oh, it's the right time. We're not actually talking about time as such. We're talking about have are there sufficient conditions for me to do an act when it demands as such? And that is our notion. That is our understanding of right timing, wrong timing. So are there sufficient conditions to which I can proceed to do something? So, for example, if I'm considering buying a house, technically, technically, there is no such thing as the wrong time to buy a house, you could say, right? But what people are going to hear when they say this, like, well, no, there's definitely a wrong time to buy a house, right? The market's down or the market's really high right now, right? The houses are, expensive. They're being sold at ridiculous prices, so it's really high, right? But that's actually not that's actually not a wrong time per se. What that means is that the conditions to buy a house isn't great right now. And that's what we mean when we say that it's the wrong time to buy a house. I mean, whether you buy a house in the fall or the winter or so on, technically, it doesn't matter. But if we're saying that there's certain conditions that happen during the seasons, like winter, summer, right? If houses are being sold in certain conditions during certain seasons, then we might say something like, oh, it's typically a bad time to buy a house during the summer or something like that. But again, it's not about the time as such. It's about the conditions within that time that we dictate as the wrong time. Um, so this is actually what's typically very fascinating about when we consider our understandings of timing. Timing, so my whole argument really is that there is no such thing as the right time, because the right time assumes that we have been able to take account of everything and every possibility possible, to which then we can make a decision. When in fact, all we do is take in consideration conditions that we believe should be met in order to proceed with an action. And after considering those conditions, whether they have been met or they suffice enough to make an action, then we act, right? Um, so again, there is no such thing as a right time, but there is such thing as looking for the right conditions to which then we can act from. But the problem, even with taking account of all the right conditions, is that we can also debilitate ourselves. We can shrink ourselves from ever taking an action, because there's always what we can call sort of like an unexpected factor, right? An unexpected condition, a sort of surprising factor that we couldn't possibly have taken account of. Um, and if you really want an example of this, or and I think this will give a really good example about why there is no such thing as a right time. So let's really make it complicated. I'm going to make this example as complicated and as real as possible to show how our notions of right timing, or the right time, is sort of conditioned on the tensions and relations even between subjective parties, right? So here's an example of this, right? You feel like right now the market for buying a house isn't great. So in your opinion, it's not a good time to buy a house, right? However, let's say you have, like, you guys are expecting like a baby, right? And your wife says something like, I don't want to be living in an apartment. I want a house, right? Now you tell her, look, it's not a great time to buy a house because, such and such conditions. It's probably the worst time, right? But let's say your wife is very adamant about having a house like right now. Um, so let's just say, for the sake of the argument, for the sake of the conditions of this interaction, right? Let's say your wife convinces you, even though it's the wrong time to buy a house, right? But see, what's interesting about this is that you are encountering in this moment, between sort of subjective relations between you and your wife, and the consideration of having a child, wanting to have a home, um, you're encountering another condition that's sort of demanding, that is sort of pushing you towards a direction that you feel is the wrong time to buy said house. Um, this is a condition that you could not have possibly accounted for, right? Because you see, what becomes very interesting is that even though from an economic point of view, it's a bad time to buy a house right now, right? But if your wife persuades you and says, hey, look, if you can at least find something that we can afford right now, despite the economic kind of like, problems with buying a house right now, If you can find it, let's take it, right? Whereas from your point of view, you would have never taken it because it's not the perfect time to buy a house right now. So even though the conditions aren't ideal to buy a house, the conditions between your wife and having a future child are becoming imposed upon you, against you, um, to buy a house, despite the economic conditions. So, what I am trying to say within all of this is that sometimes it's not about just the conditions that we can see, but it's also the conditions that we cannot foresee that will dictate when, or cause tension about when we should, so if you really take the argument between the wife and, the pregnant wife, wanting a house, and again, just to say for sake of argument, I mean, to be honest, this interaction between wife and husband or significant others, um, it could have gone either way, right? The husband could have convinced the wife that it's not the right time, you know. Um, it could have gone either way. Um, but let's just say, for the sake of this argument, that it goes in the way of the wife's, right? So if we take in consideration what the wife is saying, then we understand that actually, with the condition of the wife, of the child incoming, that in this case, despite the economic conditions for buying a house, it is the right time to buy a house because of said conditions, right? Your pregnant wife, her wanting a house. In this case, those conditions become overruled through our intersubjective relations with each other. So that's the interesting thing that happens about this notion of timing. Um, and that how, even though I understand from an economic point of view that it is the wrong time to buy a house, it could easily be the right time to buy the house if there is a condition that overrules as such. Um, so I think hopefully that gives a rough example about how even though we can take in considerations and take in conditions for making choices, um, and believing that there is a right time to do as such, um, because of our intersubjective relations with each other and as human beings, there's always there's always a possibility of an impossible condition that you could have never foreseen. And this is why I'm starting to like Derrida a lot, because he sort of he has a passion for the impossible, as Caputo says. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the issues with always thinking that there is a right time. Again, the right time is just sort of understanding that what we're really saying is we've taken account of the conditions of the current moment. The conditions I think when we say right, let me rephrase this. When we say right time, we're saying that we have satisfied the conditions that are demanded of us to then act. Okay. But as you can see, it has nothing to do with whether you do it Monday or Tuesday or Thursday or whatever season. It has nothing to do with that notion of time. It has to do with, have we satisfied those conditions or not? And there's always a mistake when we think about the conditions, because we take account of conditions that we think are important when making a decision, right? But when we have relations with other people present us conditions that we did not take account of, to which then our notion of right timing can either become reversed, meaning we realize that maybe it's not the right time to do said action, or we take account of what they're saying and we say, okay, maybe what I thought was the wrong time to do this is the right time to do this. So you can understand now that what we're talking about in this case is that there is no such thing as a right time, so to speak. There's only sufficiently met conditions that we believe should be met, until presented otherwise, until there is another possibility within the horizon that we did not expect to occur. And that is kind of like what always happens when we did not take account of a certain condition. And you see this all the time. You see this all the time with younger people, or it doesn't have to be young. It can be just people that we didn't really understand all the way through when we made a decision. you know for example, like, if I want to give like a real personal example, like me moving to Arizona, right? I couldn't have possibly have taken accounted for, like, because I didn't even think about it really when I moved to Arizona. I didn't think about all the hassles of like getting a new ID, um, getting like my car like all up to date for like Arizona standards and everything. Like, I could have never possibly accounted for all of that. That's like the issue. Um, and I could have been like, oh, I made a mistake. Maybe it was the wrong time to go to Arizona, but um, I also knew that I had a support system a little bit. So in that case, it was kind of, no matter what kind of was thrown my way, it was kind of like always the right time, because I had, the support system to sort of like help me through it, help me think through what I need to do to get myself established. So again, this notion of like conditions, have we sufficiently met conditions? And then within our own intersubjective relations with people and family, um, we can never fully account for everything. And that's the thing. And that's why, again, there is no such thing as right timing per se. But I think what I'm trying to get with the whole purpose of this talk is that despite our considerations, we can never account for anything or everything. But the thing is, in all of our lives, no matter what happens, we always have to make a decision. We always have to, so to speak, act in time. And it's because we always have to act in time that we're always demanded to make a decision, whether it be an action or a non-action. We always have to respond, and we're always demanded, insisted upon to essentially take a risk. Um, and even if we think what is considered as the right time is itself always a risk, it may be in our minds a minimal risk or a low risk, but there is no such thing as no risk at all. In this case, there is no such thing as no risk, because there is always the possibility of the thing that we could not have possibly accounted for when we made such a decision. There's always that possibility. within any decision that we make. Um, so I think I think I've exhausted that part. The second part of this talk is going to be centered on what I call fate and destiny. And this is something between my reading of Martin Buber in I and Thou. And I felt like really a lot of my philosophy of timing is kind of centered on this notion of destiny, that taking responsibility for our when is a matter of taking responsibility for our responses and turning them, making use of them. I think that's a better way to put it. Making use of them the same way an artist makes use of the things that are sort of at hand in his present moment, right? The things that he can afford, the things that he can have in front of him. If you guys want a kind of example of this, have you guys ever seen like those videos of like hobos on the street? They like take anything. They can take like a trash can or like a spoon and like make music out of it, right? My responsibility for when is exactly that we use whatever is present at hand, our previous decisions, our our resources, our understandings of life. We make use of those things and we create something out of that. And that is really the whole premise of my philosophy of timing. Is that the difference between destiny and fate is that fate is somebody that has barred themselves or turned away from or trying to escape from the things that are present at hand that they could use to creatively shape their life, despite said given conditions. So despite said given conditions, and destiny is, and because again, what Buber has said in I and Thou, and this is where I take my influence from, at least specifically on destiny and fate, is that it's really a matter about how we are turning towards that, right? If we turn away from it or try to run away from the inevitable, it's fate, right? We're running away from something that is inevitably is what it is. Destiny is making use, creatively using what is given, the inevitable givenness of our conditions, whether it be our physical limitations, our mental limitations, our economic conditions, whatever the cases those may be. It's the creative use of those conditions that we as human beings can do and shape. And that is what we turn from, that is how we turn from fate to destiny. There is a sort of subtle, I'm kind of shifting the paradigm here between free will and determinism, as you can see. But it is our creative use of what is given to us, the way that we can shape a gift that we did not want, maybe. But what's ironic is that we can shape and determine what is a gift or tragedy in this case. And so, just to end this talk, it's always the right time to face our destiny. And it's always the right time to turn that fate into a gift, and shape what is given, what is at hand in our present moments, or in the moments coming to be, despite the risk, despite the unforeseeable things that we did not expect, the impossible, really. Um, so yeah, I think I've kind of I think I've nailed that on the head. Um, but yeah, if you guys, have better examples or um, questions, I can always think about those. But I think, yeah, I think I addressed what I wanted to address today. Yeah. All right. Take care, guys.